talk a little bit more about the last build block of my UTMB training. So to put that into perspective, what do I mean by build block? Well, essentially within my training plan, I've divided it into sort of 4-week blocks. So I have 3 build weeks and then a recovery week. And this is now my second block of 3 builds with 1 recovery. First off, it's worth noting as well that within the training plan I have specific phases, and each phase is made up of a number of weeks and those build blocks. So I have the preparation phase, which is what I've just completed, then the build phase, which I'm about to go into, and then I'll have the competition phase, and finally the taper period. And with those different phases, they become more specific the closer I am to the race. The preparation phase, as I mentioned, I'm currently in, just about to finish at the end of this recovery week, and that's consisted of 8 weeks in total. So let's delve into those in a little bit more detail, and in particular, the last build block. So that build block consisted of 3 build weeks and 1 recovery week, similar to build block 1. And within that, overall, the training stress score has increased. So in the first build block, you can see on the screen the training stress score for the 3 weeks was quite a bit lower actually than in the second build block. And the reason for that was down to the duration and the intensity of the training that I was doing. Primarily though, it was down to the duration. Increasing the time on my feet, in particular of the long runs at the weekend, contributed to a higher overall training stress score. What that means is that when I look at overall fitness and fatigue, you can see that there is an overall ramp up in fitness and fatigue, and I hit a new level of both fitness and fatigue in that period. You can also see from this graph, from the fatigue level, the pink line which is going up quite sharply, that there's a reason why you have these recovery weeks. And if I focus in on a specific period around the 24th of February and that early March, you can see that the fatigue level dropped and the form, the kind of orange line, increased. And that was down to the last recovery week. Then overall there's been a general upward trend in the fatigue levels as I've been doing 3 build weeks, which is linked to the training stress score. Looking at a little bit more detail at pace and heart rate, you can see that the time in heart rate zone 1 increased dramatically in the second build block, those 3 columns on the right, the 3 tall columns on the right. And that was down to, as I mentioned, those long runs, which are typically zone 1, zone 2 type runs. And there was less work in the higher heart rate zones, which are the darker colours, which you can see in those first 3 build blocks. And that again is just down to the more specific nature of the training, and also the fact that I was struggling with tired legs as well. So trying to get into heart rate zone 6, for example, during intervals just wasn't happening. Hence, those dark red colours aren't really on the graph in the second build block. Looking at the pace as well, and you can see that in the first week of this second build block, I did actually get quite a lot of speed in the top zones, the darker blue colours. However, then as my legs got more fatigued, as I mentioned in relation to the heart rate, I wasn't really getting too much time in those upper speed zones. There was some, but not a huge amount. And again, a lot of time in that lower speed zone. Obviously I'm training for Trail Du Mont Blanc, so it is a very long way, so I'm not doing huge amounts of speed work. If this was, say, training for a 5k, 10k, I'd be doing more upper end pace. And the reason for that shift as well is not just down to the fatigue, but also because, as I mentioned, it's about getting more specific. So even with an individual build block, I have actually got slightly more specific within that, and that's down to increasing the duration of the interval. So rather than doing, say, VO2 max intervals, 3-minute repeats, for example, they're now getting up to sort of 6-7 minute interval duration. So going slightly slower, and maybe the heart rate isn't quite getting into those sort of upper zones above VO2 max. More around zone 4 typically, maybe into zone 5 around that threshold heart rate. Another area which I thought was quite interesting was the elevation by week, and as you can see on the screen now, the second build block had significantly more climbing. Typically I was averaging over 4,000 meters per week in the second build block, whereas in the first build block, those first 3 columns, those were all around 3,000 meters per week. So I increased my climbing by around 1,000 meters per week. I wasn't going out specifically to achieve those numbers of 4,000 meters. It more was the result of increasing the duration of the long runs. And if I look at another graph here, you can see that the longest run also increased in distance, and the last 2 weeks of the current build block, I think I was getting around 20 miles from my longest run both weeks, so that was about 32 kilometers. So as I mentioned, there has been a slight shift during the preparation phase and getting slightly more specific. So overall, it's been quite an encouraging first 8 weeks to my UTMB training. So it's quite a large percentage now completed actually of the 30-week plan. And the next phase will now be going into more of the build phase. So that's a shift in strength and conditioning. I did do a video about strength and conditioning. I'll put a link to that up there. And also a shift in the type of midweek higher intensity runs that I'm doing. And I will do a video focusing on those as well, tempo runs. And also there will be an increase again in the duration of my long runs. So it may not be an increase in total distance, but definitely an increase in time on feet. So I might be trying to find some longer climbs, getting more elevation, and also total time covered. So the duration, the elevation, all of those elements resulted in an increase in overall training stress score. I hope you found this video of interest. If you have, please give it a thumbs up and make sure that you share and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time.